Oh, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for that nice introduction. So, today we are going to talk about animals and animals that we eat, but we're going to focus in on an animal that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and that is fishes. Uh, when we think of fish and in these contexts with food, oftentimes we're talking about environmental impacts, health impacts, and I am going to talk about those things. But I also want to talk about the fish, the individual fish. We rarely get to experience their world, think about them as the individuals that they are. So we're going to kind of delve into all of that today and talk about fishes. And I even got a little bit of a fish image for us to meditate on as well, to bring them in to our conversation today. So so fish, and I'll say you can use the term. Often people ask me, well, why do you say fishes sometimes? Because it's not often heard. Both terms can be used for when you're talking about numerous fish, for fish plural. But technically, one species of numerous fish, you would say fish. For numerous species, like the fish in the ocean, it's actually fishes. That's kind of the proper term technically to say. So, but they can be interchangeable. So I may say fish or fishes, depending on the situation, but that's just a little interesting tidbit that one species of multiple fish is fish, to multiple species, it's fishes. Okay. So, fish are our direct evolutionary ancestors. They were the first life on Earth, the first vertebrates on Earth. And they really are our true ancestors. But because they live in the water and they don't have really a need for extensive facial movements or eyelids or expressive mouths or anything like that, when you're in the water, they don't really have a use for that. So oftentimes they're falsely perceived as being simple or unfeeling or primitive, unable to experience pain, unable to experience emotion. And this has kind of been our perception of fish for a very long time, for hundreds of years. But science is actually debunking all of this as we speak. The scientific information that has been coming out in the last 2 decades has really been fascinating, just amazing, around fishes' abilities and their cognitive abilities, their emotional abilities, and also if they feel pain. And that's what I want to start with. Do fish feel pain? Okay, actually, I want to get my PowerPoint going. So let's share screen and get that going. All right, here we go. All right, so sentience in the sea. Let's talk about the sentience in the sea. So I'll start by just introducing this book. This is a wonderful book called What a Fish Knows by Jonathan Balcombe. I highly recommend it. He has done extensive research into the scientific studies that have been done over the last couple of decades, like I was just talking about, and has compiled those studies in this book. And a lot of what is in this presentation comes from this book. So I highly recommend it. And I want to start with, do fish feel pain? Because, it's a very important aspect to the bigger question that we're really asking, which is, should we kill and eat fish, right? That's really the bigger question here. And and a lot of people do believe that fish don't feel pain. And I'll give a quick story here from my childhood. When I was a little girl, I went fishing with my father, like many, many other children in the US. We go fishing with our fathers. It's a rite of passage. And my dad and I are fishing, I think on a dock. I don't remember us being in a boat, but anyway, there was a fish that got caught on one of our lines. I think it was mine. And my dad started helping me to reel the fish in. And there was this struggle, and the fish is fighting for his life. And we bring the fish onto the deck, and the fish is just flopping around and in such distress. And my face must have been in equal distress seeing this, because my dad kept saying to me, "Oh, don't worry, they don't feel pain. They don't feel pain. This is just reflexes that you're seeing. They don't feel pain." And I remember in my little 8-year-old brain thinking, wow, Dad, I think you might be wrong, you know. But of course, that's what his father told him, and it's what most people believe. But I had an inkling that this might not be the case. And since I followed the path I did of researching and investigating animals, and farmed animals in particular, and animals that we kill for food, I have now since learned a great deal about how fish actually do feel pain. It has been scientifically pretty much concluded, as far as science concludes, you know, they're always the 99%, but concluded that fish do feel pain. And I will say so both physiologically and behaviorally. There's been numerous studies now that it's been extensively studied. And every time it comes out that they do seem to have the same, okay, so they have the same neurons that to detect harm, right? So that humans, mammals, avians all do. So high temperatures, pressure, things like that. When injured, fish produce the same naturally occurring opioids that mammals do to relieve the pain, right? We have these naturally occurring opioids that can come through the intensity of the pain. When injured, the activity in the brain of fish is actually equivalent to that of land mammals. There's a cascade of electrical activity that rushes not only to the hindbrain and brainstem, and those are the parts of the brain that are responsible for reflexes, right? To react to the pain physically. But also there is electrical activity in the brain that is in the regions for conscious sensory perception, meaning that they are perceiving the pain. So they certainly feel pain. And, you know, I'm not going to go into the details of the studies. There was horrible, extensive, terrible things that they did to these poor fish to find these things out. And I'll give a bit of a disclaimer that I, you know, certainly don't condone research in this way on any animal. But since these studies were done, I feel that actually it's an obligation to share them now so that we can gain empathy for these animals, to learn that they are feeling this pain, perceiving pain. And also behaviorally, that's another way that they can determine or detect if they feel pain. And fish react the same way that every other animal reacts behaviorally to when pain is introduced. You know, they cease normal activity. They may rub the affected area. They can maybe thrash around, rocking from side to side, laying still at the bottom of their tank. That's, you know, or the ocean, but at their tank in these studies. And when painkillers are given, when they're given morphine or other painkillers, then their regular behaviors may come back a bit. So, you know, so the conclusions have found that absolutely they respond to a variety of different painful stimuli: burning, cutting, stabbing, chemical damage, like acid burning, both physiologically and behaviorally. So fish consciously experience pain. And it's more and more being recognized by large scientific bodies. They're taking notice of all this science. And the Smithsonian Institute said the collective evidence is now robust enough that biologists and veterinarians increasingly accept fish pain as a reality. And then this was interesting. This was from the American American Veterinary Medical Association. And they published new guidelines on euthanasia, and they brought fish into their euthanasia guidelines, saying Suggestions that finfish respond to pain merely represent simple reflexes, Dad, has been refuted. The preponderance of accumulated evidence supports the position that finfish should be accorded the same considerations as terrestrial vertebrates in regard to relief from pain. So, unequivocally, yes, fish feel pain. So now that we know that and we've established that, we can look at more interesting things, and science is doing that. They're moving on to, do fish have, what is their life like? What is their brain? What's happening in their brains? What is their cognitive ability? What are their emotions? And the science here is just fascinating as well. So from a neurophysiological perspective, fish have the functional equivalent of a limbic system and other nervous systems that are linked to emotion and emotional learning. So they have that same part of the brain as well. So we know that there are these parts of the brains that are specific to emotion in fish. Science has discovered that fish are sentient, they are aware, they are communicative, they're social, they can be virtuous, they can be mischievous. There's all these wonderful stories of these different ways that fish have these different personalities and little things that they have done. They can use tools in different situations. They can solve problems, solve puzzles. It's amazing what we've learned. And they play. They engage in object play, solitary play, social play with each other, interspecies play with other species. So these are all signs of complex cognitive function. And they have preferences too of who they want to spend time with, who they want to partner with, what foods they want. Even in the same species of fish, there may be different preferences for different foods, things like that. And communication. So because fish don't have ears, it was thought for a long time, it was just assumed for a long time that they didn't hear or make noise. And this is not the case at all, because we don't have the same ears to detect the sounds that they make in the air. I mean, we have different hearing capabilities. So now that there's underwater sound detecting equipment that's a lot more sensitive, we now know that they have a range of acoustic sounds that they're making, and that their bodies can produce sounds and can perceive sounds. So they are communicating with each other. They have language. So parenting, this was very interesting to me when I learned about this. You know, most people believe that fish just lay eggs and go away and the babies hatch and kind of fend for themselves. And that is the case with some species of fishes. But there's numerous species actually that offer parenting, protection, caregiving to their offspring. Some fish have live birth as well. The cartilage fish, sharks and rays have live birth. And then the egg laying in fishes can be really extremely complex. There's just elaborate ways that they protect both their fish and their offspring. Some fish can construct these different little nests and shelters with sand or other materials, plant materials. Some fish can create these little bubble rafts. They create these little rafts around the eggs that protect and float the eggs. And some parent, like this fish we see here, and sometimes the mouth of the mom is the protective area. So the mouth will open. You might have seen this on video. Mouth opens and all the little fishes go bloop, 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 when there's danger in the area, or predator in the area. And they go into the mom's mouth, sometimes the dad's mouth, and are protected. So both genders, you know, can be involved in the parenting. Of course, seahorse dads are famous for keeping the babies safe in a pouch until they're ready to be hatched. So I thought that was really fascinating when I learned about all that there's all this parenting and caregiving going on with fishes. And whoops, let's go back one. And wolf eels mate for life. I found this fascinating as well. Wolf eels are these beautiful eels that you see here. I think they're beautiful. And there was a wonderful part of a documentary that I saw on wolf eels where they find their cave and they, mate for life with their little mates in the cave. And they had all these images of them caressing and cuddling in their caves together that I thought was very sweet. So there's again, so much scientific information now around awareness and emotion. Okay, so memory is one of those things. It's another place where, just like the myth that they don't feel pain, there's this myth that they don't have a long memory, like that a goldfish, there's all these tropes in cartoons and things like that, where a goldfish, is surprised every 3 minutes or 3 seconds or whatever, because they didn't remember what just happened. That's so just our perception of and misunderstanding. Absolutely, they have memory. They have very long-term memory, and and there's just behavioral things that we've learned that prove this. So I would think, obviously, they will often avoid an area where they've been attacked. Like, they were attacked by a predator and survived, they will avoid that area like it's a bad memory. They don't want to go back to that area. They can learn and remember puzzles and mazes. And even when they've figured out a puzzle to get through and are taken out of that situation for months and brought back, they'll remember that puzzle and go straight through instead of having to relearn it after months. So, and migrating fish, I mean, just thinking about migrating fish that are born in a, deep inland in a stream and fresh water in a tributary, and then make their way out to sea, go miles and miles in the ocean, and then are able to somehow make their way back through all the different options and miles of tributary back to their home spawning ground where they were born, years ago or months ago, or well, years ago. So a year ago sometimes. So they're able to lay their eggs there. So of course they have memory, they remember where that was. Touch is another interesting thing. Fish are highly sensitive to touch, and tactile connection can really enrich their lives. Many fish court each other with gentle nubbing or rubbing or nipping at each other and their little bodies. There's lots of videos of fish wanting to be petted, people putting their hands in the water and the fish coming up to be touched, fish swimming around people's hands, getting stroked and touched, and also accounts from divers having interactions with fish touching them. Not all fish want to be touched. Again, this is individual, so it's not going to be all of them. And I will also say that if you are diving, to always please not come upon fish or go up and kind of force or try to engage with touching them. Let them come to you. Of course, be sure that they want to be touched. All right. So learning is another interesting area. And so I'm going to give another disclaimer here and say that intelligence should never be a factor in whether we protect an animal and whether we exploit an animal and whether we breed and kill an animal. Intelligence shouldn't really even come into the picture. That should not be a gauge for how we, treat an animal. Those things should be the factors there should be: do they feel pain? Can they suffer? Do they feel fear? Things like that, their emotional states. That's where we should be looking to as to whether or not to exploit an animal. But with that said, there's been some really interesting studies about intelligence in fish and learning with fish. And one, they did an experiment with fish, and they did the same experiment with numerous animal species, I believe, and monkeys as well. Some different species of monkeys. And how the experiment goes is there were two plates of food, two plates of food, a blue plate and a red plate. And if so the animal would come into the situation with two plates of food to choose from. If they started eating on the red plate, then the blue plate would stay and they would get both plates of food. But if they started eating on the other plate, the blue plate, then the red plate would be taken away at each time. So it was kind of a learning experience. They had to figure it out. It was a puzzle. If they started with one, then the other would stay. If they started with the other, one would get taken away. And of course, we want both plates to stay. We want all the food, right? So, interestingly, they did this same experiment with capuchin monkeys, orangutans, chimpanzees, and fish. Guess who figured it out the fastest? Fish. Fish figured it out faster than all the species of monkeys. It took them about 45 tries to figure it out. The monkeys took double that time to figure it out, and the chimpanzees never did quite figure it out. So it kind of like flips what we think we know about fish on its head, right? We think that they are simple and that certainly a monkey would test higher on some kind of puzzle or learning experience. No, not necessarily. And in Jonathan Balcom's book that I mentioned at the beginning, What a Fish Knows, here's a quote from the book about this study. He said, "When fishes outperform primates on a mental task, it's another reminder of how brain size, body size, presence of fur, feathers, or scales, and evolutionary proximity to humans is wobbly criteria for gauging intelligence." So, interesting stuff. And the last one I'll talk about kind of in this area of awareness and emotion is fear and anxiety. Can they experience fear and anxiety? It's another question that has been proposed to science and that science is uncovering. And I think that this one's really, really important to our conversation, like if they can feel pain. This is another one that's important to our conversation because ultimately, remember, our larger question here is, should we be killing and eating fish, right? That's the bigger question here. And so do they experience fear and anxiety in the process of being caught and killed and eaten? Well, not eaten, but caught and killed. So, and it has been documented scientifically confirmed that fish do feel fear. They respond to dangerous situations the same as any animal. Their breathing gets faster, their heart rate increases. They release distress hormones and pheromones. They show signs of panic. They may flee or freeze or get bigger or change color. They have all kinds of defensive mechanisms. So that's from fear. And then after an incident of fear or anxiety, they'll often avoid the area where that occurred. And also they may stop eating for a while, just being in kind of a distressed mode physiologically. So again, fish do feel fear and anxiety. So, it can be kind of challenging for humans to kind of conceptualize and consider that other animals are sentient and conscious, have consciousness, especially fish. But in 2012, biologists and animal experts came together at a conference and they created what's called the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. And it's stated really technically, so I'm going to kind of give a layman's interpretation of it, but they included fish as well as some non-vertebrates like octopus in this assessment. And what they said is that consciousness is almost undoubtedly present in the animal kingdom. Emotion is almost undoubtedly present in the animal kingdom. And consciousness does not require a big brain or a backbone or a vertebrae. So really fascinating stuff that we're learning in science. I encourage you to dig into it if you're into that kind of thing. It's really fun. Starting with Jonathan Balcom's book is a great place to start. And I'm going to tell you a little story before we move on to the environmental impacts of fishing, or kind of wrapping up the who fish are section. But I wanted to tell you a story about Blackie. Blackie was a little black moor goldfish. And this is an example of Blackie. This isn't Blackie, but this is representation of Blackie. And he was what's called a black moor goldfish, when goldfish are black. And Blackie was born a little wonky. He was born with deformity, a deformity that prevented him from swimming properly. And he could really just kind of hop about at the bottom of the tank. Well, he had a companion in the tank called Big Red. And Big Red was a much larger goldfish that was in the tank with Blackie. And Big Red, when it was time for feeding, and the fish food would be given at the top, fish food, put into the tank, and it kind of drizzles down, right? Big Red would go down to the bottom of the tank, and he would scoop up Blackie and kind of give him a ride on his back up to the food. And he would let Blackie eat the food first, let Blackie have his fill of food, made sure that Blackie was fed. And then he would go down, gently put Blackie back down, and then Big Red would go and eat his meal. And, it's to think about this. What's going on here? What's going on with Big Red? There's compassion and kindness and friendship and empathy and caretaking, selflessness, generosity, right? All those things. Would you have ever thought of any of those emotions and that fish could express any of those emotions? Probably not. But now you know Blackie's story. And there's dozens, if not hundreds, of other stories like that that show that fish have the capacity for deep and meaningful and complex emotions. All right, so fish think, fish feel, fish have their own lives to live. They are individuals, and we have no right to take their lives unnecessarily, and it is unnecessary to eat fish. So, all right, so we're going to move on to the fishing industry and kind of the bigger picture of fishing and the environmental impact. There will also be some ethics on the killing and slaughter of fish as well, but mostly around environmental. So the fishing industry and how we kill fish. So the number of fish killed each year far exceeds the number of people who have ever existed on Earth. It's mind-boggling, honestly, if you think about it. The number of fish killed every year exceeds the number of people who have ever existed on Earth. It's overwhelming. It's estimated that 100 billion farmed fish are killed globally every year, and about another 1 to 3 trillion fish are killed in the wild. The numbers are staggering. They're the least protected animal. There's no laws in the US regarding how fish are caught or treated or killed for food. It's a massacre. It's horrible. So we're going to go through a few ways that fish are killed in the industry. What you're seeing here is the factory trawlers pulling up these nets. There's huge nets that just scoop everything up in their path, and I'm going to talk a little more about them later. But the first one I want to break down is longline fishing. Longline fishing is another industrial way of fishing animals, or fishing the fish. So they put a line in the water with buoys that float. It can be up to 60 miles in length, 2,500 hooks down, just amazingly large numbers of hooks and fish killed. And after studying each of the different ways that the industry kills fish, I have concluded that I feel that longline fishing is one of the worst as far as ethically, because not only are the fish hooked, and that can be very painful when they eat the bait and the hook, that hook gets caught somewhere along the line of their digestive tract. I mean, it's either it goes all the way to the stomach and hooks in the stomach, or their esophagus somewhere, or in their throat or mouth, and they're hooked, and they're pulling and they're fighting it. Well, if you're just recreational fishing, that only lasts so long, 5 minutes or so until the fish is pulled out, and then whatever happens to the poor thing after that. But here on the long line, they're just left for hours or days, helpless, struggling, fighting, this hook, trying to get away and probably exhausting themselves. They're susceptible to predators. Predators can come along and just eat them. It's got to be the most horrible thing to not only be in so much pain trying to pull yourself away from this hook in your digestive system, but then to be left like that for days. It's unimaginable. It's got to be horrible. And then of course they're hauled onto the boat and then often suffocate at that point. So deep sea dwelling fish, they suffer from what's called decompression when they are pulled up quickly. So fish have these gas-filled swim bladders that can decrease the amount of gas to be able to go and dive deep into the ocean, and they fill that bladder with gas to buoy themselves and float back up to the surface. And this is a very slow process, just like a diver has to go down slowly. The decompression process, same thing with fish. So when they are pulled up quickly from the deep sea, it can be really taxing on their bodies. It can really cause just a gruesome list of terrible things that happen to their little bodies, and it's been definitely observed and studied. And it can cause organs to erupt, to collapse. Decompression causes just esophageal inversion, the esophagus coming out of their mouths, bulging eyes out of the socket, arterial embolisms, hemorrhaging, organ tearing, damage, prolapse of the rectum coming out of their body, and just horrible things. So it's just a gruesome and torturous way to die. And the fish that do make it to the knife don't have it much better. There was a study done that found that when fish are cut, either being cut by the gills or cut at the gills or decapitated, the degree to which fish suffer is, quote, very high. That was what the study concluded. That's horrible as well. There's other ways to kill fish: electrocution, suffocation, them being put on ice, which is basically just prolonged suffocation. And oftentimes these things like electrocution and being put on ice, these methods cause immobility, but not a lack of sensibility or senses. So basically they're frozen, but they're still feeling everything. So even though they look like they're not in pain because they're immobile, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not feeling the pain. And suffering can still be going on. So just horrible. And it's a massive killing. I mean, the environmental impact of the fishing that we're doing is catastrophic. And I really encourage you to watch the movie Seaspiracy. It was kind of a fishing and oceans follow-up to the movie Cowspiracy. Seaspiracy, really a fascinating and deep dive into the just environmental devastation that we're causing globally with fishing. So right now we have, it's really like the fish have nowhere to hide. We've got, the technology is crazy. Sonar and satellite navigation and depth sensors and GPS and all this, they send out spotter planes and helicopters to try to find the fish. It's amazing. Humans really, we're the most dangerous animal on this planet right now. And we're the most deadly animal on this planet, and the fish have nowhere to hide. So there's miles of netting that scoop up just everything in their path. We're basically clear cutting the ocean floors with this massive netting. coral, kelp, seaweed, sea fan, all the plants at the bottom of the ocean that are for protective purposes, like that's where fish lay their eggs, where they spawn, where they hide, all those things is just being wiped away, being clear cut by this netting. So it's not only the fish, but also their habitat that's being destroyed. Uh, so 7 of the top 10, let me see my next slide. Yeah, this is the bykill slide. So I'll just say, I'll go back to this one for these stats. I'll just read some stats to you. So 7 of the top 10 marine fish species are classified as fully exploited or overexploited. Nearly 90% of all the large predatory fish in the ocean are gone. We wiped them out. So they're increasingly have to fish for smaller fish, fishing down the food chain. We also see a 62% drop in seabirds and a 60% in coral reefs due to fishing. And there's $35 billion in government subsidies that goes to the fishing industry. So we're propping up this industry with government dollars as well. So bykill, this is in the industry term is bycatch. I call it bykill because nothing survives this process. Basically, when they scoop up all of these fish, often only about 20% of what they scoop up can be sold, and the rest is thrown back dead, right? More than 7 million tons of so-called bycatch, the bykill, is killed every year. Over 300,000 seabirds, such as sea turtles and dolphins and whales and sharks and sea stars and all the non-target fish species, eels, albatross, seabirds, they all get caught in this netting. For every pound of shrimp that's caught in the Gulf of Mexico, 4 pounds of bycatch is wasted, thrown back, overboard, dead. Endangered species are having a really hard time because of the fishing industry. They're starving without enough food to eat, and they're caught in the fishing nets and killed. This fishing gear is just polluting the ocean. When there's a net that is got a hole in it or has broken or whatever, I mean, they don't haul those in and bring them back to the land and put them in a landfill. No, they just throw them cut them off, throw them in the ocean. And so the ocean's just littered with all of these nets, and these animals that need to breathe air get caught in the nets and are unable to surface for air. It's just tragic. And what are these nets made of? Well, they used to be made of hemp or cotton or something like that. Not anymore. They're made of nylon. And nylon is plastic. So they're plastic. So this is a huge, huge area of plastic pollution in the ocean are these fishing nets. So fishing, it's so destructive in so many ways, besides just killing fish. And it's called ghost nets, these ghost nets that float around and just kill indiscriminately. So many people think that sustainable fishing may be a one way to solve the problem. There's a lot of sustainable fishing labels out there, marine certified, sustainable and stuff like that. Unfortunately, and as the movie Seaspiracy brings to light, this industry is woefully underregulated. It's very difficult to regulate. The fishing vessels can go out for weeks, months at a time. So a lot of those fishing vessels are not getting, having people going out and inspecting. This inspection is very minimal. Inspectors get bought off. There's a lot of, unfortunately, dirty business that goes on. And so these labels mean very, very little. And one of the examples of that is the longline fishing of Nova Scotia swordfish. So Nova Scotia swordfish are killed by those the longline fishing that I talked about earlier. But that longline fishing also kills tens of thousands of non-target endangered blue shark, and they don't use the blue shark for anything, just throw them back dead. but that's an endangered species, and that Nova Scotia swordfish still gets a stamp of sustainable fishing, a sustainable fishing label, even though they kill 5 times as many endangered shark as they do the swordfish. So there's a lot of examples where the sustainable labels just are not working. And another thing that people think is a possible solution is fish farming. And fish farming, unfortunately, is really increasing right now. Fish farms are being built all over the place as we speak. But fish farming, is not the solution. What we find with fish farming is we find kind of the same problems that we get when we confine farmed animals, for mammals, large farmed animals, well, any farmed animals, the cows, pigs, chickens. When we confine them, we get these situations where there's, sickness and injury and lots of problems. And fish farms are the same way. I don't know if you've ever been to a fish farm. I have been to a few of them to check them out. Excuse me. And, when you are walking up, that there's water, but it just looks kind of black, and oftentimes, and as you can see in this picture, I don't know if you can tell in the picture, but behind it, you can see the nice blue water, because they're often connected to some larger body of water, like they're at the shoreline, built on the shoreline of a lake or some other body of water. And you walk up to them, and the first thing you notice is the water is just kind of black, just really black, compared to whatever body of water that they're on, which looks blue. And so there's just this black water, and you walk up, excuse me, and there's a lot of movement in the water, right? And you're just suddenly like, what am I looking at? Because it's just the water's just, and you realize that there are so many fish in these tiny little, like half swimming pool size pools. And the fish are just on top of each other. It's horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to cough for a minute. I apologize. I'm a little choked. And I didn't bring water, which I should have. Excuse me. Whew, sorry. Okay. So anyway, so these fish farms they're just notorious for dumping an arsenal of pharmaceuticals into the water, because these fish are on top of each other. They're swimming in their own waste. Why the water is so black is because it's their waste. There's so much waste in the water. So they're swimming in their own waste. They're on top of each other. And so they get sick. And so these they dump pharmaceuticals and antibiotics and all kinds of stuff in the water, trying to keep them healthy enough till they're up to market weight, And there's also sea lice. Sea lice is a big problem. Sea lice, not too much of a threat in the wild, but sea lice thrive in these fish farming situations. They just go crazy because the next fish is just inches away, and they eat the fish up. When fish have extreme cases of sea lice, they eat the flesh around their eyes, around their face. It can be extremely painful for them. They're just eaten up with the sea lice. And a 10 to 30% loss from sea lice, from sickness, all of that is considered acceptable on fish farms. So they basically know that up to 30% of the fish are just going to die before they get up to market weight, and that's just an acceptable loss. That's horrible. And the industry kills far more fish than it produces. Of course, they are having to buy smaller wild-caught fish to feed the farmed fish, right? So, 450 billion wild-caught fish are fed to the farmed fish. So there's still they're still out there fishing in the wild as well. So fish farms don't solve that problem. It's really a mess. And so for like one salmon grown to slaughter weight, it's estimated that 250 to 3,000 fish, depending on the size of the fish, will be caught and fed to that one salmon. and it's ridiculous. And then also when we're eating fish on an ethical level, we're eating way more animals than if we ate an herbivore, because an herbivore does just eats plants, but fish eat other fish, so we're killing lots more fish. So interesting, interesting stuff. All right, so we're going to move on from fish farms, and fish is wasted on farmed animals. So half of the world's fish catch is not eaten by humans, but fed to farmed animals. So more fish are consumed by animals we kill and eat in the US than by the entire human population of all the countries of Western Europe combined. What a waste. What an absolute waste. And overfishing is also contributing to climate change. So we've found that fish droppings, the ocean is a filter of fish droppings, of course, and those fish droppings actually create a carbon sink. They help the ocean to absorb carbon from the atmosphere, helping global warming, right? But when there's not as many fish in the ocean, then there's not as much fish waste, not as many droppings, and that is actually increasing climate change. It just shows you how interconnected everything is in unforeseen ways, and how our impact has unforeseen consequences. It's amazing to me. So okay, so we're going to switch gears now and go to the last section, which is around health, and just talking about eating fish and our health, looking at a bigger picture. The dietary recommendations across the board, from the American Cancer Society to the American Dietetic Association to every scientific body, pretty much, governmental body, large scientific bodies, have some basic recommendations that they give. Okay, and they kind of all come to the same conclusions, and that is to reduce saturated fat intake. Okay, where do you find saturated fat? Animal products. And to moderate protein intake. And this one is kind of shocking to people. People think, oh, I thought I was supposed to get more protein. No, not necessarily. That is not the recommendation. Most people are getting too much protein because our diets are too rich in animal foods. So the recommendation is actually to moderate protein. And where do we get excess protein, too much protein? Animal foods. Okay, so what are we supposed to increase? That's decreasing. What are we supposed to increase? What should we eat? Complex carbohydrates. Where do we find those? Plants, the plant kingdom. Increase fiber. Okay, well, where's fiber? Plants, right? Increase phytochemicals, antioxidants. Where do you think you find those? Plants, plant foods. So basically, when it's broken down, reduce animal foods, increase plant foods. This is you find this across the board. All right. And guess what? I will remind everyone, fish are animals. This often gets forgotten. They seem to fall into some other category. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh, well, I'm vegetarian, except I eat fish, or I'm vegan, but I eat fish. Like fish are some other category. No, fish are animals. And a lot of people, they think that the reason that they're making that exception often is health. They think that, well, it's the healthy meat, right? Well, I'm going to show you right now why it's not. And this is the beginning of that. We'll go on. So animal products, this is kind of just another way to say it. Animal products, including fish, are a risk factor for disease. Now, what are the risk factors for disease? Low fiber, low carbohydrate, low phytochemicals, low antioxidants, high in saturated fat, high in protein. Okay, those are the risk factors for disease. And guess what? That's what you find in animal foods. So if we want to reduce our risk factor for disease, reducing animal foods. And once again, fish are animals. Okay, they have the same physiological makeup as an animal and the same issues that we're talking about here. And so the conclusion from all of this is really that veganism is just a logical extension of the conventional nutritional recommendations to eat more plants and eat less animals. It's veganism is just a natural extension of all those recommendations. All right, well, getting a little more specific about fish, because now some people will be like, well, wait. We have to have the omega-3s. Where are we going to get omega-3s if we don't eat fish? All right, well, let's talk about that. So, the American Medical Association, they did a meta-analysis of the benefit of eating fish and fish oils. And a meta-analysis is where they actually went in and looked at numerous studies. That's what a lot of these large governmental bodies will do, is that they'll go in and instead of just focusing in on one study or cherry picking one study, they'll look at a large body of studies on the same thing and then come to a conclusion, find where the majority of information, leans, right? So they did a meta-analysis this is the American Medical Association, of eating fatty fish and fish oil and the effects of omega-3 on lifespan, cardiac death, and stroke. And they found that there was no protective benefit from these chronic degenerative diseases or from early death from fish, that did not provide the health protections that were promised. So, and I would recommend watching Dr. Michael Greger's video. Dr. Michael Greger, trying to remember the name of his site. If anyone knows it, they could put it in the chat. Michael Greger is an awesome, wonderful plant-based nutritionist. And I can't remember his site, but he has this wonderful video on fish oil. I think he has several on fish oil, actually, that you can go in and get like some really good detailed information about how basically what he breaks down is that there were these studies done in the 80s that had some benefit around fish oil, omega-3s, and these chronic degenerative diseases. And so the fish oil industry just jumped on that, and they started really pushing those studies. They pushed their fish oil thing, made a ton, billions and billions of dollars. And now, though, there's been 4 decades of some subsequent studies, of further studies, and they haven't really found that again. The further studies have actually found no benefit. So that's what's going on. And that's why you have to look at meta-analyses and not just 1 or 2 studies. But if you're concerned about omega-3s, you can always supplement a vegan supplement or a plant-based supplement of omega-3s. And you can find them in these plant foods that I have listed here as well, if you're concerned about it. Another issue with fish is that they really contain a lot of stuff you don't want, a lot of things you don't want in your body, like mercury and other carcinogens, PCBs, things like that, toxins. They are bioaccumulators. Basically, they're filtering whatever's in the ocean, whatever's in the water, they're filtering that through their bodies, and it bioaccumulates, it accumulates in their flesh. So when you're eating their flesh, you're also eating a concentration of all the toxins in the ocean, right? And unfortunately, our oceans are heavily polluted. Mercury is a huge one. There's solid evidence, scientific evidence, that methylmercury toxin has terrible health effects and is found in high concentrations in fish. There's also PCBs, DDT, lead, arsenic, banned pesticides, heavy metals, just this wide array of horrible toxins that they find in fish. And there was a study done where there was more than 12,000 food samples. They took 12,000 different samples of all kinds of different foods from 18 different countries. And they found the highest level of PCB concentration found in fish and fish oil. That's where they found the highest concentration of PCBs, with 12,000 different kinds of foods from 18 countries. The lowest contamination was found in, you guessed it, plant foods. Plant foods had the lowest. So fish, it's unfortunate that they have this false perception of being the healthy meat, because they certainly are not. It is certainly not. It's detrimental to your health. And I did want to just touch on plastics in the ocean, and plastics also found in fish. There's been study after study that large quantities of plastics is also found in fish and in seabirds. So if you're eating fish, you're getting that plastic as well. And I really hope that today, that this talk perhaps will be an inspiration for you to stop eating fish if you do still include fish in your diet. I hope that this will be an inspiration for you to eliminate fish from your diet. If you already don't eat fish, that's awesome. Thank you. And the fish, thank you. And I would ask you and encourage you to take it a step further and reduce your use of plastic. Plastic is such a horrible, pollutive entity in our oceans, in our life. There's this great Pacific garbage patch where the water flows, the currents have created this island of plastic, and it's bigger than Texas. It's just horrible in the Gulf of between in the Pacific Ocean, between here and Hawaii and the West Coast and Hawaii. I'm in California. So just horrible. And, it's great that we hate straws. I appreciate that there is this big movement, a kind of against plastic straws, but plastic straws are just such a small percentage of the plastic. Really, one of the highest percentages of plastic is fishing gear. Like I talked about earlier, the nylon nets from the fishing industry. So yet another contributor to this plastic pollution is the fishing industry. You want to make that connection again. So yet another reason to stop this horrible industry. All right. So I'm going to wrap up now. I'll just plug a few things quickly here at the end. Wonderful organization, fishfeel.org. They have a great website with extensive information on everything that I've talked about. So I encourage you to go and check them out, fishfeel.org. They're very active on social media as well. I also would love you to check out my podcast. I have a podcast, the Hope for the Animals podcast, and I interview interesting guests. I have commentary and news, and I have several podcast episodes on fish, on the fishing industry and fish as well. If you go to my homepage on the website's really easy, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org. And I have categorized my episodes, and there's ones, you can pick a category like fish or the environment or chickens. And then I've the podcasts that are around that issue. You go to that page and you can choose. So, and if you listen to podcasts, on all of them, Apple, Spotify, all of those, you can put them in your listening library, put me in your listening library, and you'll be notified when a new podcast drops. All right, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org is the website. And I'll just wrap up with this quote from Jonathan Balcomb's book, bringing it back to that book, What a Fish Knows. Here's a wonderful quote from his book. A fish is an individual with a personality and relationships. He or she can plan and learn, perceive and innovate, soothe and scheme, experience moments of pleasure, fear, playfulness, pain, and joy. A fish feels and a fish knows. So thank you very much for sticking with me through this presentation, and I'll stop sharing and we can maybe take questions. Thank you.
Hope, thank you so much for this. So meaningful for the fish and for so many of us. Really appreciate it. We're definitely looking forward to a Q&A session with you. Before we get in there, thanks for sharing more about your podcast. I want to tell everyone where they can get your book information, where's the best place to get your book?
Yeah, wherever you buy books, Amazon, any of those. So just any place that you usually buy books, it should be there.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. And so want to tell our audience for the first time, or remind those who are returning audience members, the way we go about our Q&A here at The Real Truth About Health is we typically don't take questions directly from the chat box. We ask you to raise your hand, your virtual hand. And so the way you do that, in case you don't know, is you have different Zoom tabs. And one of those tabs on your Zoom screen is called reactions. So click on your reactions tab and you'll see different emojis pop up. And one of them says raise hand. You'll click on the raise hand button and we'll see your raised hand come in, and we'll take questions as they come in. And that's basically it. I will actually call you by your first name and I'll unmute you as you come in. And so looks like it's going to take a couple of minutes for some hands to come in. And as they do, I wonder if, you covered so much on fish today, and well needed. I think we all needed to hear that in so many different ways. I also have a list of questions for you I'd love to jump into, if that's okay. They may not all adhere to fish per se, but we know that you're so well-rounded in this entire movement. So I'd love to go down that route as well. And I guess, I just want to start with sort of a generic question. If someone wants to end the mistreatment of animals in general, and how much does it really help if they just stop eating animal products? What difference does it make, as they'll say, well, I'm only one person? What do you say to somebody like that?
Yeah, we hear this a lot. I'm just one person. My choices aren't going to matter. What I eat doesn't matter. I'm just one person. Well, what I would say to that is that it does matter. It absolutely matters. And on various different levels, it matters. And I would say that, first of all, just in the supply and demand, the basic supply and demand. So veganism really is a boycott. It's a boycott of a horrible and destructive and a terrible industry where animals suffer and the environment is decimated. So it's a boycott of the industry, right? And with any boycott, basically you're trying to reduce the demand, right? You want to reduce the demand. So that industry responds and they either reduce the supply or switch to something else, right? That's how supply and demand works. So, you may be just one person, but when you're going to the store and you buy the vegan fish fillets, that there's so many interesting new vegan fish products actually now that you can get. So you're buying that fish fillet and you grab a couple of those. And maybe you've taken the last one. Well, that tells the store clerk, these are selling. I'm going to buy more of these. So it really does make a difference, even if you're buying one or two products, because you're not the only one. There's a few other vegans out there that are doing that as well. And it increases that demand for the positive products, for the products that are less impactful on the environment, less impactful on animals. And it's going to be that much less fish that they bring into the fish case because you've bought the alternative vegan fish. So it certainly helps on that level, even though it doesn't feel impactful. Your $100 worth of groceries, it does make a difference. You've got, several vegan products in your cart. Yeah, you've made a difference there. So don't feel like it doesn't. And likewise, at a restaurant, especially if it's not a vegan restaurant and you're ordering a vegan meal, it increases the demand for that vegan stuff on the menu. And maybe they'll add 2 or 3 more when several vegans have asked for that 1 or 2 meals on options on the menu. So certainly matters in that way. And I will say that it matters on another level as well. And this is more kind of in the, more, I would say hopeful way. Okay. It's not so quantifiable as the supply and demand, but just living our lives as vegans, as compassionate people, as nonviolent people, that is going to make a difference in your interactions with people, and even if you don't necessarily tell someone you're vegan, if they see you buying the vegan product, you've made a difference there. Even if you don't necessarily have a conversation with someone directly about veganism, but you're talking about compassion to animals, you've made a difference there. So just having the ethos, the aura, I'll say, of being vegan and being nonviolent and living as much as close to our own of your own values, because anyone who is even considering vegan, then they value nonviolence. They value wanting to protect the environment. So you're living in line with your values, and that does reflect out. It reflects out to everyone you encounter, everything you do. So it might not be so quantifiable as the supply and demand, but there's unquantifiable benefit as well. So lots of levels.
Thank you very much for that, Hope. We've had a few hands raised, and so I'm going to jump now to Julie. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about how to answer the proponents of fish oil consumption in terms of the difficulties of people who are not breastfed in converting plant-based omega-3s to be more usable by their bodies, and also difficulties of older people converting plant-based omega-3s.
Well, okay, I will say that I am not a health expert. My expertise is in behavior, the environment, the animals, things like that. The health aspects, I've done some research, but I haven't delved deeply in because it's not my expertise. I'm not a nutritionist. So what I would advise is to listen to the myriad of other people that are on this conference. There's so many amazing, very knowledgeable nutritionists and doctors and others in this conference throughout these few days of the conference. And I know that some of them will be talking about fish oil. I have a feeling. So that would be a great question for one of the nutritionists. There's a lot of wonderful information out there about all that. But it is my understanding, I'll just conclude by saying it's my understanding that the plant supplements. So, maybe there might be issue with, just saying, oh, I'm eating walnuts, so I'm getting enough omega-3s. Okay, possibly not. But these supplements are created to cover, to supplement what you need. So those plant-based supplements often are derived from seaweeds and other marine plants. So it's what the fish are eating to get the omega-3s, right? So there's definitely omega-3 in there. So those, I would say, if someone is really concerned, that they just need to do the plant-based supplements, because the supplements should give you what you need.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And now we're going to go over to Benny. Welcome, Benny.
Hi, Hope. Thank you for such a great presentation. And slightly off of the fish, I've been hearing other people who are not in the vegan world talk about carbon neutral agriculture. Now it's necessary to have cattle on land in order to, well, I'm not exactly sure. It sounds like you know what it is, but basically to be better for carbon purposes. Is that true, or is there something I'm missing there? What's your comment about that?
Yes, well, what that is about is people that want to, how do you say it, have their meat and eat it too, or they're trying to find a better way to do a horrible thing, basically. So what you're talking about is it has a lot of different names. I mean, it's been called a bunch of different things, but now I think it's kind of landed on regenerative grazing. Regenerative animal agriculture is pretty much what the new terminology is now. And basically, I'll just kind of explain what they're proposing. What it is they say that, getting the animals out of the confinement buildings onto pasture, and having huge areas of land where they've sectioned off different areas of this pasture, and they'll move a small herd of animals, ruminant animals, around so that they're just grazing in one little area, and then they move them after a few weeks or months to another area, and then that area that they just grazed can regenerate, sequester carbon, And so it's not as detrimental as like a CAFOS, a confinement feedlot operation, the big industrial. So that's the proposal. Unfortunately, scientifically, it just doesn't hold water. And there's been extensive studies on this. It's new as in that we're just now hearing about it and people are just now trying it in the US, but it's not really a new concept. And there has been about 3 decades of comprehensive study on these regenerative and short duration grazing methods. And there's just some basic problems, basic problems. One is that you need a much smaller number of animals and a lot of land, right? On a much larger area of land. And if land use is one of the problems, right now land use for agriculture is one of our biggest issues. We use most of our arable land, land on the earth for grazing animals. And that is a problem. It's detrimental. It's degrading all the land, and we're having to. So basic math, basic problem. Smaller amount of animals for a larger area is not going to feed a lot of people. We'd have to have massive reduction of meat consumption. It's not going to feed the almost, what do we have now, 8 billion people on the planet. It's just not going to feed everyone. So that's some basic math. Then there's other issues that come into it too. It's not as self-contained as they propose. A lot of times there is grain that's grown with a lot of water and grown in another area that's being trucked in as supplemental feed, especially in the winter time. The grass isn't enough, depending on what state they're in. There's so many issues going on here. And actually on my podcast, I have several podcasts that are focused on this. So if you want to get into some really great detail about this, I had Dr. Tushar Mehta break it down. Another gentleman, James O'Donovan from Ireland. They have this issue in Ireland, and he was breaking it down in Ireland, the same problem. So I know this is a question and answer, so I don't want to get into too much detail, but basically, bottom line is that, this is something that everyone wants to believe is true, that we can have beef in some way and make it somewhat ecological. But unfortunately, we're actually finding that grass-fed beef can produce more greenhouse gases, and they drink more water. Because they're, moving around and out in the sun, so they're drinking more water. There's all kinds of issues. So it's not, unfortunately, the green superstar that everyone wants it to be. And there's a lot of detail to it. So I encourage you to look deeper into it, listen to some of my podcasts. But yeah, best is plant-based.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And I guess that leads to this question, which is, does lab-grown meat end our problem of hurting animals? Does it end our problem of destroying the environment?
I don't really want to touch the lab-grown meat thing. There's so much that's big. That's even bigger than regenerative. I'll just say this. I have a really fascinating podcast coming up next on the 15th. It's my Earth Day special podcast. And I interviewed this wonderful gentleman, Kartik Shaker, who has written a book called After Meat. And it's all about the technologies that are coming out now, the interesting, fascinating new technologies for meat substitutes, for meat-free meats. And he has a really interesting take on lab-grown meat, and but his focus is on fermentation technology, and he's really into this fermentation technology. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff coming down the pipe. I'm not an expert in it all, and I don't know that I really want to get in the weeds there. I would say, please listen to my next podcast, because we get into it on my next podcast.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. And we now have a question coming in from Phineas. Welcome, Phineas.
Hi, I'm wondering about contamination in seaweed and kelp.
So there is, absolutely. Unfortunately, the ocean is very polluted. So they do absorb some of those toxins I was talking about. But the key here is that bioaccumulation that I was talking about. So basically in the ocean, so the little fish eat the seaweed, and then a bigger fish eats the little fish, and then a bigger fish eats that fish. And each time, each stage, there's bioaccumulation happening, meaning that whatever toxins were in that seaweed go into the next fish, and then that combination of toxins goes into the next fish, and it just gets worse and worse. So the larger the fish, the more fish they ate, the more bioaccumulation happens in their bodies and in the flesh. So you're going to find higher concentrations of those toxins, the PCBs, the mercury, all those things I mentioned in the larger fish flesh. There's a much less concentration, much lower numbers in the sea plants.
Got it. Thank you very much for that, Hope. What works and what doesn't work in communicating with people who eat differently than you, such as somebody who's vegan trying to speak with a person who's eating animal products? What do you recommend for them?
Well, I've had 30 years I've been vegan myself for 32 years, and I've had 30 years to go through numerous different iterations and options of how to do this. So, the conclusions that I've come to, and a lot of the animal protection movement has come to, and the vegan movement has come to, is that, of course, we want to come at any time we're encountering people with empathy, with understanding, with a nonviolent communication type of way of approaching it. So, well, I won't say never, because there's a time and place for agitation. There's a time and place for anger that can be at a protest or some other situation. But if we're talking about one-on-one interactions, either face-to-face or online, especially online, really being empathetic and loving as much as possible, listening, understanding where this person's coming from, understanding what their concerns are. And that can really help in what direction to go in, because there's so many different directions that we could go in. I mean, it's possible this interaction, you're only going to have a few minutes to present some kind of information, right? So you want to go in the right direction. So ask questions. Why are you concerned? What are your thoughts? And if they bring up the environment and global warming, yeah, I've thought about it because of climate change. I heard something about. Great, let's go that direction. Let's talk about the environmental impact of animal agriculture. Let's say they have a dog with them. Their companion animal is with them. That can be a great way, and be like, hey, just like you love your dog, I love pigs because they're so close to dogs, something like that, right? So personalizing it to that person is a great way to do it. Always coming at it from a personal place. Like, I do this because of this, not you should do this. No, I do this because it's important to me. And then they don't feel like have to be so defensive, right? So these are all little wonderful tricks and things that we can do. And I'll say too, online, please, everyone, if you don't hear anything else today, well, first thing you hear, fish are awesome and feel pain and feel emotion. That's the first thing. Second thing to hear today from me is that we need to be more kind online as vegans. We really do. I see all the time people, unfortunately, online communication in the comments and things like that, the niceties of society, the things that we hold in our interactions face to face just get blown away. The things that keep us like civil with people and that keep us kind to people get just blown away with the anonymity of the internet. And I see people saying the most horrible things to each other and being attacking and personally attacking, and please don't do this. Let's not do this. I remember was listening to a woman. She was a environmental climate change, social media person, social media influencer. And the interviewer asked her, so, do you get a lot of, climate deniers? You have to deal with a lot of climate deniers in your comments. And she said, well, yeah, there's that. But, the vegans are just terrible. They're always, mean to me for not talking about animal agriculture enough. Don't be that person. Let's not, be kind and generous and forgiving and try to be understanding, even online. We lose that somehow online. So very important to read, reread. Would you say this in person to this person? Think about that. And realize that people don't make change when you're being mean to them. People don't make change when you're being attacking, no. They make change when they can hear you. And the only way they're going to hear you is if you're coming at it from a kind, genuine, nonviolent place. So I have a whole presentation on this because I'm so just kind of on nonviolent and really best practices for etiquette, online etiquette. So just keep that nonviolence going, folks.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great advice, Hope. And let's move now to Kaylee. Hi, Kaylee, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Hope. Thank you for your sensitivity and your kindness. I understood that there are ways that people are now growing algae without, not in polluted waters and not near Fukushima and all of this. I wondered if the sheets that I've seen of, I think it's nori in Costco, whether that's part of it, whether this is real. Are sheets of seaweed that we can buy available that are not from polluted waters and without interfering with nature's ocean bottoms?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about this. I do know, though, there are some noris that are sold at the health food stores, and I've gone to their websites to just kind of look and see about this. Where is it being grown? And they do. There's ones that do claim, and let's hope they're being upfront and honest. Hopefully they are, but there's ones that claim that they are grown in fresh water, and fresh water, obviously means not Fukushima, and not that there's freshwater algae and seaweed being grown, so it would have less pollutants. Is kind of the point of the freshwater. So and I think that they'll have also some information about that on their websites. Where it's grown, that they're trying to do it as toxin free as possible, things like that. So, I would go to the websites, research those brands, see what others are saying about them, perhaps, and just look into it, because we want to believe what they say, but you never know. It's true.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And let's go now to Kathy. Welcome, Kathy.
Hi. Whoops, I think I opened an app on my phone while I'm trying to talk to you guys. So I think I heard you just now say that you have a whole blog on how to respond to different questions or how to rebut or have rebuttals or have, something to say when someone says something. So here's one, and I'd like to know what you would say if someone says, but there's a story in the Bible where Jesus fed many people, and there wasn't enough food to feed, and the fish multiplied.
Yeah.
And so Jesus fed them a fish. What would you say?
Well, okay. First of all, let me just clarify. I don't have a blog about that. What I was talking about is that I have a presentation that I've given, and there are videos of it out there. You might be able to find one. And I think I call it something like, online etiquette or animal activists, animal advocacies, online etiquette, stuff like that. So that's what I was talking about. I give a presentation around. I gave one recently it was last year for the San Francisco Veg Fest. So, and I know they have it online. So if you want to try to dig around for that. But as far as Jesus and the fishes, so I would assess, first of all, I would assess how Christian they are, really. Because, if they're not really Christian and they're just bringing this up, who cares? Try to move it to something else. I wouldn't really talk about it much if they're not really Christian. But someone that brings this up, it's likely that they are Christian. And I was actually raised Southern Baptist, born again Christian. My family is very, very, very Christian, very religious. So I, can relate. And my grandmother would have certainly made this argument had we had these conversations. And I think what I would say is a couple of things. I would say first that there are Christian vegetarian associations and also the Seventh-day Adventists. There's whole Christian denominations that are vegetarian. And they have several things that they say about this, and I would say, this isn't me saying this. These are Christian organizations that say this, that the word for fish, if you go back in the Hebrew, actually can also be a word for a tuber. And they believe that it's possible that it was a tuber that was being referred to. But as translations happened, it ended up being a fish in the end, possibly because of the connection to the disciples being fishermen. But the disciples left their fishing. They stopped fishing to follow Jesus. So they stopped killing fish to follow Jesus. There's a few things like that. Another thing that I would say is, but beside putting that aside, let's look at now at modern times. What if Jesus was here now? Would he approve of the massive fishing that we're doing to the oceans? Would he approve of the decimation that we are doing from the fishing of the oceans, the environmental impact, just the mass slaughter? I think that he wouldn't approve of that. I think he would make different choices today. So, that's one way to approach it, something like that.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And again, folks, we still have some time. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, you can click on your reactions tab. And in doing so, once you do that, you'll see a raise hand function. You click on raise hand and you can jump right in here and ask your question of Hope Bohanec. And Hope, I've got another question, and that is, tell everybody about ag-gag bills. Are they still an issue currently? And are you seeing them in and around the fishing industry as well?
Okay, so ag-gag bills, I'll explain what they are. I don't have a whole lot of knowledge about them, but I'll tell you what I know. Ag-gag bills are bills that are popping up in certain states that are becoming law, that basically are a reaction to all the undercover investigations that have been going on in farmed animal, both like the dairy industry, the egg industry, slaughterhouses, all of those industries where a activist goes in and films, like works for a few weeks, films what's going on, and they always come out with horrifying video of what's going on in there. And because this has been so successful and could arguably be one of the, handful of tools that has gotten us to the point of just a mass increase in vegan products and interest in veganism, the industry is responding. And they want to close those doors. They don't want people to know what's going on in these industries. So they are creating these laws that make it a criminal act to videotape or photograph what they're doing. And so that's what the ag-gag laws are. And, it's so just, and yes, they are more, to answer your question, it's definitely still going on. They're still fighting. There are wonderful animal protection lawyers that go in and try and stop these things from happening. Sometimes they get passed in states, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we fight it and they, don't. So it's this ongoing battle state by state. And what's so interesting to me is that if there's an industry that has to make criminal just seeing what they're doing, just going in and looking at what they're doing, if they have to make that criminal, how on earth can we think that anything right is going on, that anything proper or acceptable is going on in there, right? I mean, what do they have to hide? My God, that they would have to make it illegal to take a picture. I mean, whew, it's unfathomable to me that that they're able to do that. That they're like, yeah, sure, you shouldn't have to let pictures be taken. But yeah, this is what's going on. This is how they're so protected through government, to do what they do. And it doesn't really apply to the fishing industry at this time. It's land mammals and avians, the chickens that we're talking about here. But yeah, ag-gag laws, it's kind of interesting because it's a reaction to our very successful campaigns of undercover investigation. So it's really, they're backed into a corner and kind of, this is a last gasp, like they're fighting us. So that's good in a way that we, are able to have that much influence. But we're going to see more and more of this. We're going to see these reactions for them trying to save their dying industry, basically, save this industry that is dying and should die. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Looks like we have a question coming in from Mike. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you very much for this discussion. I think intuitively, most of us understand like crabs and lobsters have, they at least fear things because you can see them snap at you and that kind of thing. But fish, all they kind of do is swim away from you. So we don't really ever think about their pain or suffering and things like that. So thank you very much for that. And on that subject, there's been any studies on like turtles and other things and their pain and suffering thresholds? Maybe not thresholds the right way, but similar to what you did with the fish, they kind of studied it and found out those things. Is there other studies that maybe went as far as turtles and crabs and lobsters and that kind of thing?
Yes, and turtles, by the way, are in the same realm really as mammals. I mean, they have a very complex system, just like mammals. So turtles, you can kind of equate with any mammal, really. But then we get into areas like crustaceans, the lobsters and crabs, and even shellfish, oysters, that kind of thing, right? And, there's varying degrees of ways that their little bodies are similar to ours. And this is being studied. To answer your question, yes, science is looking into all of this now. There's not as much data as there is with fish, but it is starting to come in. And I actually do have a write-up on this, and I wish I had it ready to whip out so I could break it down, because they're different scientific bodies and zoonotic descriptions of the different entities and kind of where they are with the studies. And I wish I had printed it out and had it with me, the notes. I don't, but I'll try to remember a little bit. And basically, so for instance, clams don't necessarily have the same similar physiological systems that we do, that fish do, but they have similar things, like they do have the same kind of nervous systems. They have the clams have a little foot that they can take out, and they can kind of walk and move around on this little foot. They are sensitive to light, even though they don't have eyes. They can detect when there's light and dark, like they know when they're in the shade or in a certain, So even though it's not as complex as a fish, they definitely have similar systems and senses So there's something going on there. There's something going on there beyond plants. And I think that's really the point. You know, where is that line of sentience? Where is that line of consciousness? We're exploring that. We don't really know. But what I would say is, for me, I want to err on the side of caution. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not just a plant. We know that they're not just a plant. There's something more complex going on in a clam, something more complex going on certainly in a crab. So even though they might not have the same thing going on, they definitely have movement. They have reaction. They have to stimuli. You know, there's behavioral issues, behavioral reactions. You know, so I like to give them the benefit of the doubt and exclude them from food, from exploiting them, from killing them, from harvesting them, from killing them and eating them, because I feel that there's something more going on. They're more than plants, and so I feel that it's important to exclude them from harm.
Thank you so much for that. And let's go to Dominique. Welcome, Dominique.
Hi, Hope. Thank you
Hi.
for this talk. Very
Yeah.
interesting. So I was wondering, because of course people always find really good reasons against, arguments, and it's really tiresome. So I was wondering, because I think it's preposterous, but people say, well, plants have feelings too. How do you respond to that?
Yes, this is, boy, we're seeing this one a lot now. This is certainly the go-to kind of gotcha question for the vegans, and from a non-vegan. We see this all the time now. So there's numerous different angles, and I determine what I'm going to say by how much time I have for the person, right? If it's a quick interaction, I don't have a lot of time. What I'll say is something to the effect of, would you rather mow your lawn or kick a dog? There's a huge difference. We know it. We know it intuitively, that animals feel pain. We should not cause harm to animals, and plants are for harvesting and eating. That's, bottom line. So I think that's kind of a quick and easy way to look at it and answer it. If you're in a conversation and there's more time and you're getting into it, then there's more that can be said. And what I would say is, this is often what I'll say is, thank you so much for really caring about plants. Because obviously, a lot of time it's not really that they actually care about plants. They're just trying to catch you in a gotcha moment. But there may be some out there, more spiritual people possibly, that do really believe that plants feel pain. I totally understand that. I get that. That's good. Let's think about these things. Let's explore it. Okay. So what I would say is, thank you so much for caring about plants and being concerned if plants have feelings. That's really important. We should look at everything and make sure that we're not causing violence. Absolutely. So let's say plants do feel pain. All right. We have to eat something, right? We've got to eat something. And basically what you're saying is, well, let's just throw our hands up and eat everything because plants feel pain too, right? But let's consider that if plants do feel pain, when you're eating a plant-based diet, you're actually causing less suffering then, because you're eating less everything, because animals eat plants, right? So there's all the plants that the animals ate, and then you're eating that animal. So you're causing all of that suffering. But if you're just eating plants, quantity-wise, you're causing less suffering. So if you really do care about plants, then you should eat vegan. So, that's an interesting way to go about it, but something that I've come up with that, that seems to work. I don't know. But, it's a tough one because it's really mostly it's a gotcha question. Like they're just trying to kind of get you. So really, I would assess whether you even want to have that conversation with the person. If it's a troll online that's just trying to get you, ignore it. You don't have to respond to that, but if it's someone that's sincerely asking, then maybe you go one of the routes that I suggested.
Thanks for that, Hope. Looks like Kathy is back. Hi, Kathy. Welcome back.
Yeah, hi. So I, I almost hate to say this in this audience, but I'm a reluctant vegan. But here's my hopeful comment, and that is that I think repetition is one of the biggest ways to reach people, is to be repeating things. Because I belong to not a Facebook group, a YouTube community that Chef AJ that talks about veganism a lot. And I find myself, after having repeatedly hearing this from people in the group and Chef AJ, that I don't buy meat anymore. But I'm not an ethical or a moral vegan yet. Maybe that yet is the hopeful part. But the repetition that I've experienced has changed how I feed myself. And even when I do, and I don't buy meat for myself, but I do for my husband because he's not vegan. And even though I'm not vegan, I don't buy meat for myself, but I do for him. I think about, geez, I don't really want to be buying this. So repetition, I think, is something that helps. But the other thing, if I represent, if the vegan community represents 1% of America, and I don't know if it's even close to 1%, and I'm in the other 99%, I, along with all the other 99% people who are not vegan, I never heard this message about cows and methane gas and the environment. All I thought about with regard to climate warming, climate change, is the pollution from industries and from cars and that kind of stuff. So that message needs to come out somehow. And I don't think I've even heard it enough to be able to explain it to anyone. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for being brave and, speaking up. And even though you're not vegan, that's, that we want you here. You're exactly who we want here. So thank you for being here. That's all right. It's great. And it's great that you're exploring, this sometimes takes time, years to get there, and that's fine. So thank you so much. And so, yeah, to your point about the environmental connection with animal agriculture, it's true. It's so frustrating to me because, I've been kind of shouting it, to the ether for 30 years about that connection. In fact, interestingly, I was going through some old activism, paper activism before the internet that I used to do. And I used to have a newsletter. It was dated 2004. And the main article, the big, headline article that I had written was animal agriculture's contribution to global warming, right? And it's like, creak, creak, everybody's like, what's global warming? Who cares? So it's taken a long time for us to finally get to the point where we are being heard a bit. I do see it more and more just in the last 5 years in mainstream environmental discourse a bit more. I even see it now in Time Magazine, National Geographic, where you would have never heard anything about it before. I just saw something in National Geographic. It was just one of those short page, little things they insert, and it said, we know that going vegan or vegetarian is good for climate change, but here's some other ideas in the kitchen. And I was like, wow, we know that? Really? That's great. Okay. I mean, they said it everybody knows that now. I'm like, wow, amazing. So it is getting out there more and more, which is fantastic. But yes, it needs to be much more, and we're trying. There are those connections being made. There's Greta Thunberg now that is vegan, and speaking out about it more. The younger generation are making those connections between all systematic oppressions, and so veganism is kind of intertwining with lots of other issues, which is great. So.
Thank you so much for that, Hope. And I'm going to take a quick moment. I want to clarify something that Kathy said, and just an interesting note. I don't know if you find this with other people. So Kathy said she actually is vegan, but that she's a reluctant vegan, which is to say that I think, she's still working at it, and she's still, she's not all the way there in terms of the humanity of it, right? And so, or the humaneness of it, if that's the right word. And I just want to say, for me, a while ago, I finally decided to start eating plant-based, and I was always the sad diet. I was meat and potatoes forever. I started working here at the Real Truth of Health. It was 50 pounds ago, and all I did was eat meat and horrible, sad diet type stuff. And that said, I eventually made the decision for my health to become plant-based, and I've been working on that now for a while, and I am basically plant-based. My point is when I was a meat eater all my life, I always knew in the back of my head, gosh, this is horrible for the animals. However, I was pretending not to know, because I didn't look at my hamburger as a cow. I just looked at it as a hamburger. I didn't think of bacon as a pig. I just thought, oh my gosh, bacon and eggs, this is wonderful. I pretended not to know what was going on there. Now that I have become plant-based, and now that I'm there and I don't eat meat anymore, it's easier for me to go, now I'm actually disgusted by the thought of eating meat, not because of my health, but because of the poor animals and what they're going through. And so I've allowed myself to think that way now that I've finally gotten to the other side, so to speak. And I wonder if that strikes a chord with anybody else, or with Kathy, or anybody else you've spoken with, if you might comment on that. And if you don't have a comment, that's okay. I just wanted to share that because it's.
I didn't know you wanted Kathy to respond.
No, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. It's oftentimes people come in because they need to improve their health, they have some kind of health problem or crisis, or just wanting to improve their health. And then they're opened up to this world as they're researching about the ethics and the environment and, and spiritual. There's so much. So there's a lot to it that kind of can come in secondary once you're in. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a couple of more follow-up questions. In comes Kaylee. Welcome, Kaylee.
Oh, Ben, thank you so much. Hope, please, can you tell us something about the inner lives, or something about the lives of lobsters? Because so many people have no problem boiling them alive. And that always turns me right back to World War II, and that they've done that to people. And how come we do this now? Can you get us people to empathize more with lobsters?
Well, everything that I talked about in my presentation regarding fish applies to lobsters. It absolutely applies to lobsters. They're included in that Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, that they are conscious, they are sensing pain, they have emotion. All of that applies to lobsters. And, there's all these accounts of lobsters fighting for their lives in the boiling water, like clawing out of the pot, trying to escape the boiling water. I mean, there's so many accounts of these. And now, actually, there are countries that have banned boiling lobsters alive, because it is absolutely recognized that it's cruel, and that they experience the pain that they suffer. And so that is actually being banned in some areas, the boiling alive. So so lobsters, they are sensitive, wonderful individuals, just like fish, all the fishes, and we should accord them the same considerations that we do for our dogs and cats. We would never consider doing something as horrible to our dog, never. And even though lobsters may look different, we know scientifically, we know behaviorally now that they are the same. So.
Thanks very much for that, Hope. And Mike is back with a follow-up question. And hi, Mike, welcome back.
Well, Ben, thank you very much. And I wanted to kind of follow up on your comment about the reluctance of vegans. And it comes down to marketing, the way I look at it, because in the old days, farmers didn't want you to know you were eating a cow or a pig. So instead they called it hamburger or a steak or bacon or baby back or what have you, so that you didn't really equate the animal that you were going to eat. And take that a step further, if you look at your supermarket, if they didn't make the red meat that you see in the supermarket look extremely appetizing and yummy, if we saw a piece of dead flesh, which is what it is, that's probably 1,000 miles from where it was a week ago, it would not be appetizing to us to buy. So they have to treat it and color it and do different things to market it to the consumers, so that the consumers will continue to purchase it because it looks yummy. It's going to satisfy that craving that meat eaters have. And I used to have it as well, but I see it from the marketing point of view, which a lot of things come back to money, which we've talked about a great deal in this conference. And I just wanted to say that that's the biggest thing I see is the marketing. But then I also wanted to ask a question of Hope, and that is, you talked a little bit about exploiting the animals as food sources, but I also worry sometimes because the Creator put a lot of wonderful creatures on this earth. And the one that popped in my brain kind of immediately was the horseshoe crab. And the horseshoe crab has a very, very unique metabolism. It has a blue blood, and it's got very special properties that the pharmaceutical industry and so forth, and even the space industries. I think I saw a documentary that they use that blue blood to sterilize equipment in the space station and on the shuttle and so forth because of its properties. So I'm worried about that kind of exploration as well. I don't know if you have any information on protecting animals and creatures from the pharmaceutical companies in that way, because they may even be more damaging than we as meat eaters eating the seafood out of the sea.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The horseshoe crab is heavily exploited in research and pharmaceuticals. There's lots of animals that you would not, fish. There's so many fish in scientific research as well. You would have no idea. I mean, it's chickens. They use all kinds of different animals in scientific research for everything. And it is horrible. It's not an area that's in my expertise. I'm, of course, more around farmed animals and encouraging people to go vegan because we have control. We have some control over that as consumers. This, we don't have as much control of consumers. This is more of a systematic thing that someone needs to go in and really change these systems. And so my advice is to support organizations that are focused on animal experimentation. There are some really wonderful organizations out there that work specifically on these issues, trying to get like computer modeling and other there's the technologies come so far that we don't need to be experimenting on animals anymore. There's some wonderful technologies out there. They're trying to get them to switch over to those kinds of technologies and stop exploiting animals. So that's my advice really, is if you're interested or concerned about this, to support those organizations that's doing that systematic work in animal experimentation.
Hope, thank you so much. And again, when we say thank you, like really thank you. This is the end of our Q&A session. And what you've presented today is very eye-opening for so many of us. And we just appreciate you coming back year after year and everything you shared today. And I know I'm not the only one that wants to thank you. So we're going to ask our tech team to unmute our entire audience. And everybody, what would you like to say to Hope Bohanec?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.